Okay. So as we were discussing about this first discourse that the Buddha gave to the five Parivrajak, we are coming to the conclusion of that discourse. And I think this concluding part of the first sermon is very interesting because as we know that Baba Sahib Ambedkar had this style of offering the conclusions and the essence of long discussions. So I think this section 6 of this part is very important in a lot of ways because it offers a kind of a summary of what has gone ahead in Buddha's discussion with the five Parivrajak. We have seen that that Baba Sahib Ambedkar had divided the Buddha's first discourse into the path of purity, the path of righteousness, and the path of virtue. And he in this section he tries to bring all these paths together and make them into a kind of I would say a whole of a teaching, in a sense of bringing all the elements together and tying them together. So of course in the part 6 in the part, section 6, the Buddha begins by asking the Parivrajaka, after teaching them the three paths, he begins with asking them a question, and that question is, I think, very important. And Alka madam has been raising this point again and again in the groups, is about, is not personal purity the foundation of good in the world? So the question of personal purity is very important here. And as we have seen, the path itself begins with the path of purity, and the path of purity entails the path of five precepts. And Baba Sahib Ambedkar has gone into an intense discussion on path of purity. But here he begins with asking a question. And I think this question is very relevant to be asked again and again. The question, I will repeat again, goes like this: is not personal purity the foundation of good in the world? And the five Parivrajaka answered, it is as thou sayest. It is as you said, Buddha, you are right. The personal purity is the foundation of good in the world. And then Buddha goes on elaborating what is the personal purity and how the personal purity is undermined by covetousness, passion, and ignorance, the three poisons in Buddhism, raga, dosa, and moha. So our purity, the personal purity, is undermined by these three poisons, the three doshas, that is raga, dvesha, and moha. And Baba Sahib Ambedkar has used the word like covetousness, passion, and ignorance. Okay. And I think the rest of the four are directly related to the five precepts. Of course, there is no, I would say, the what to say, the last precept is absent. But if you look at it carefully, the four precepts are there: the destruction of life, theft, adultery, and lying. So is not personal purity undermined by covetousness, passion, ignorance, the destruction of life, theft, adultery, and lying? So these are five precepts. As we can see that these are five precepts, but one of the precepts is missing, that is the precept related to intoxication. So I think this is very important, that if we start raising this question, is not personal purity undermined by raga, dosa, and moha? And is it not undermined by not practicing the five precepts? The destruction of life, theft, adultery, and lying, and taking intoxicants. So now I think why we need this personal purity, because I think this is also a relevant question as to why do we need personal purity. The personal purity is needed in order to build up sufficient strength of character so that this evil should be kept under control. So you see, this human nature is such that, the human mind is such that, a lot of things takes a lot of time. It's not easy to do away with raga, dvesha, and moha, and it's not easy for all of us to practice five precepts, but we can try to keep them under control. Okay. And I think this is very significant. So for the Buddha and for Baba Sahib Ambedkar, we cannot create those ethical grids where we pit in the people. but we have to find a ways in ourselves and in the communities to keep these destructive emotions under check, under control. And I think this is also another question that Baba Ambedkar has raised. How can a man be the instrument of good if he has no personal purity in him? And they replied, as it is as thou sayest. So you see, this path of purity, Baba Ambedkar has called is it as the foundation of everything good in the world. And we have had gone through the intense discussion on the path of purity. And here, when Baba Ambedkar, after deliberating on all the three paths, he is coming to concluding of the discourse. He's trying to knit all these elements together. And when he's trying to knit all these elements in together, he's putting the personal purity as kind of the base to the entire path, this threefold path. So I think this verse 3 is very important, and I think it has to be repeated again and again, these questions again and again. Now this verse number 4 goes into a very important aspect. And as we were talking about the Baba Ambedkar has described the suffering and elaborated the conceptual framework of suffering in terms of the personal suffering, in terms of the social suffering, and the suffering that is inbuilt in the nature. So the part 4 and is about the path of righteousness. Okay, and Baba Ambedkar elsewhere talks about the kingdom of righteousness, the path of the Dhamma, the path of the concept of Dhamma Rajya. So here, if we see the verse number 4, and this is very interesting for all of us to understand in a sense of its implication for our society. Again, why do men not mind enslaving or dominating others? Why is it that we don't mind enslaving and dominating others? Why do men not mind making the lives of others unhappy? Is it not because men are not righteous? Now, this word righteous and the path of righteousness and the path of the kingdom of righteousness, which Baba Ambedkar talks in the Buddha and Dhamma as we go along, is in their conduct towards one another. And they answered in affirmative. They said, why do men not mind enslaving and dominating others? What is it in us that we don't mind enslaving others or dominating others? And the answer is, will not the practice of the Ashtanga Marga, this practice of Ashtanga Marga that Baba Ambedkar has talked about, he tries to answer this question with another question. He's asking, will not the practice of Ashtanga Marga, the path of right virtue, right view, right aims, right speech, right livelihood, right means, right mindfulness, right perseverance, and right contemplation, in short, the path of righteousness, if followed by everyone, remove all injustice and inhumanity that man does to man? And they said yes. So you see, as I was saying, that this is very fundamental discussion in the Buddhism, where I would say it's like understanding the heart of Buddhism from the perspective of Baba Ambedkar. And he has, as always, tried to simplify the things for us. And if we cogitate or think about it repeatedly, we begin to see the greatness of Baba Sahib underlying this. So, he begins with the path of purity as the kind of basis for, building the strength of the character. For what? And then the path progresses to what is called the practice of Ashtanga Marga, the path of righteousness. And it's about one man doing injustice to another man, one human being doing injustice to another human being. And we can see the similar things in the path of virtue as well, because when we try to cultivate the path of virtue, the path of Shila, then what happens is we, in a way, try not to exploit others. Because, if we elaborate the first precept, Anatipata Virmani, it's not just about killing, but it's also about cultivating love. It's not cultivating love within, but also without, inspiring other people to cultivate love, inspiring other people to be good to other human beings. And in a way, this This first precept is sort of a bedrock for a culture of love that we talk about all the time. And all those precepts can be understood in this way. But when we think about Buddhism in the sense of a path, we only concentrate on the personal purity so much that we forget all the paths that Baba Ambedkar has so beautifully laid down here. It is not that the personal purity is no matter. It's very important. And Baba Ambedkar has brought out the importance of it. And he also described how the personal purity is undermined by the raga, dosa, and moha, and by not practicing the 5 precepts. But advancing further, he has come to a level where he's talking about how we can be righteous towards other human being, and the path of being righteous, and path of creating righteousness. The path of righteousness itself is nothing but the Ashtanga Marga, and that Ashtanga Marga is practiced by a lot of people within communities, without outside the communities. It will definitely lead to the removal of injustice and inhumanity. I think these 2 words are very striking, because we talk Baba Sahib's fight was for justice and for humanity. He fought all his life for justice. He fought all his life for humanity. And humanity for him was a very deeper concept. It involved the dignity of the individual, the dignity of the human beings. And the justice, is a kind of a keynote of Baba Sahib Ambedkar's life. And here Baba Sahib Ambedkar is attributing the path of leading toward justice and humanity by the way of Ashtanga Marga. And I think this is very remarkable. Now in the verse number 6, he turns to the path of virtue, and we have seen that the virtue is the path of paramitas. Okay, I think this is very innovative way of describing Buddha's Dhamma, so that we begin to have a kind of a tool to understand the Buddha's Dhamma in totality. Now, he turning to the path of virtue, he asked, is not dana necessary to remove the suffering of the needy and the poor? You please pay attention to all these words, as I have been increasingly stressing on in all the classes, that we should read every sentence and every word very carefully and, cogitate, reflect on those words and sentences. Now, here you see, is not dana necessary to remove the suffering of the needy and the poor and to promote general good? So dana basically means sharing, Dana is an attitude of being able to share, whatever we have with others. It is completely opposite of the world in which we live, when people are trying to possess everything. We have this tendency within us to possess everything, to not let go anything. And a day will come where, we won't be able to possess anything. And therefore, I think this is very remarkable when the Buddhism, the path of virtue begins with sharing, giving. And I think that is very remarkable, because it goes against the general sort of psychology that we all live into. We always try to hold on to things. We always try to hold on to relationships. We always try to hold on to material possessions. We try to hold on to name. We try to hold on to fame and whatnot. Okay, so dana, sharing, giving, is a kind of a necessity, a necessary condition for removing the suffering of needy and the poor and to promote general good. And then, Baba Ambedkar goes into this all 10 paramitas, saying how they are important for promoting the goodness in the world. And we know that we have seen in the previous section that the Bodhisattva, before he becomes the Buddha, he has to master all these 10 paramitas, isn't it? The perfection of giving, they have to master it. I think this in a way tied up with what is today known as it's like socially engaged Buddhism, where you have you try to engage with the society. Paramitas are nothing but the engagement with the society. You pick up any paramita and you will see that there is a presence of another human being, because dana, we cannot just do it. There has to be some other human being, isn't it? Same with the Shila, the paramita of Shil. And then Baba Sahib goes on to asking the question. I think the way Baba Ambedkar has underlined this section is very important. And I'm going to read it and then gloss over it so that we will have more clarity on this. Is not karuna necessary to be drawn to the relief of poverty and suffering? See, poverty and suffering, And Baba Ambedkar had brought out from the text that the Buddha was very concerned about the poverty and suffering. And Buddha thought that poverty is suffering. Okay. And there is a word in Pali called Daridra. When we say in Marathi Daridra or like that, there are words like that. So, then Baba Ambedkar goes on asking the question, like, is not Nekkhamma necessary to selfless work? Nekkhamma means not cherishing oneself, but doing the selfless service. And it's necessary to do self-help work. Is not upeka necessary for sustained endeavor, even though there is no personal gain? Now, this sixth section we can understand as Baba Ambedkar is trying to imply that all the paramitas that Buddha has laid out, the 10 paramitas, are having these social consequences. And we can see that. And when we attribute those paramitas to the Bodhisattva, we see that the Bodhisattva's life is nothing but devoted to what we can say the social good and for others. In some of the traditions of Mahayana, they say that the others are more important than yourself, putting others before your interest. You don't cherish yourself the way we cherish ourselves in our day-to-day lives, but we try to put others in place of our own selves, and we try to serve them as much as we can. So you see, this sort of understanding of paramita is very important. The verse number 7 is not love for man necessary. Now we have to ask this question to ourselves again and again. Is not love necessary for us to live? And they said yes. Okay, so we can. This is also a very important pedagogical tool by which you raise the questions, and by seeking the answers to the question, we try to educate ourselves. So the fundamental question that is asked in the verse number 7 is not love for man necessary? Are we not supposed to love other human beings? Are we not supposed to think about other human beings? So the Parivrajaka answered as it's necessary for man to love. I go further and say love is not enough. So mere loving other people is not enough. What is required is Maitri. And what is Maitri? It is wider than love. It means fellowship, not merely with human beings, but with all living beings. It is not confined to human beings. Is not such Maitri necessary? So you see the degree of depth that we see Baba Ambedkar is trying to take us to. He begins with the concept of love, and we all talk about love all human beings, love animals, like that. These are the words that we use all the time. But here Baba Ambedkar is saying that we should go further. Love is not enough. What is required is Maitri. And what is Maitri? It means fellowship. Fellowship means the feeling of treating others like our own fellows, like our own brothers and sisters. And Baba Ambedkar is saying that it's not just related to human beings, but with all living beings. It is not confined to human beings. It is not such Maitri necessary. What else can give to all living beings the same happiness which one seeks for one's own self? See, whatever we are trying to seek for our own self, if we can turn around and we try to seek, help other people in their seekings, that is the ultimate Maitri. We are not just trying to seek for our one's own self, but we are also trying to help other people also. To keep the mind impartial. See, this is how this text progresses, the sentences. To keep the mind impartial, open to all. It is not closed to anyone. It's open to all. And then I think the foundational statement of the Maitri is this: with affection for everyone and hatred for none. You see, I think this concept of Maitri, if we read it repeatedly, a lot of things begin to get clearer to us as to what does it mean by Maitri. It's not mere love. It's the fellowship with other human beings, and it's not just limited to the human beings. It's also, encompasses the other living beings. And it is like, the way you seek happiness for yourself, you also understand that the other human beings or other beings are also seeking the happiness for themselves. And to keep the mind impartial, open to all. So this Maitri is not something which we can do only with a particular group of people or a class of people. It should be open for all, and it has to have love for all and hatred for none. And then Buddha asked this question to the Parivrajak, and they all said yes. And the verse number 10 is sort of, the highest point of the entire, discussion on the three paths. And that is, the practice of this virtue must, however, be accompanied by pradnya, intelligence. See, the word of use, the Indic language word for this intelligence is buddhi. And one of the meaning of the Buddha is that one who is having buddhi. Now we generally use it for knowledge or whatever in Marathi language, or I think even in Hindi language. But we have to understand the word buddhi, and in the context of pradnya, because these are all synonymous words, and Buddha is nothing but buddhi. So in the verse number 10, the practice of these virtues, all the 9 paramitas, however, be accompanied by pradnya. So dan, shil, nekkhamma, adhishtan, whatever paramitas there are, they cannot be just alone. They have to be accompanied by pradnya, intelligence. And then in verse number 11, Baba Sahib Ambedkar raises this question: is not pradnya necessary? He's asked this question: is not pradnya necessary? The Parivrajaka gave no answer. So Parivrajaka couldn't understand. So they gave no answer. To force them to answer his question, the Buddha went on to say that the qualities of a good man are: do no evil. Sabba papasya karnam, do no evil. Think nothing that is evil. Get his livelihood in no evil way, and say nothing that is evil or is likely to hurt anyone. And they said, yes, so it is. You see the discussion of where it is going on. But is doing good deeds blindly to be welcomed? Now, a lot of people do good things in the world, but they do it blindly. People think that if they think that it's a good deed if they donate it to the temples. They think that it's a good deed if they offer huge amount of money to certain temples or sometimes certain places of worship. And, there are a lot of good things that seemingly look good on the surface of it. And Baba Sahib Ambedkar is asking the question, sometimes we do charity, not for the sake of doing good, but, in order to enhance our own egos. And there are a lot of things that we do, they seem very good on the surface, but underlying the surface, we begin to see that the intentions are very different. So here also, Baba Sahib Ambedkar similarly raises the question in the verse number 12, but is doing good deeds blindly to be welcomed? Asked the Buddha, and I say no, this is not enough, said the Buddha to the Parivrajak. If it was enough, said the Buddha to the Parivrajak, then a tiny babe could be proclaimed to be always doing good. For as yet, the babe does not know what a body means, much less will it do evil with its body beyond kicking about. It does not know what speech is, much less will it say anything evil beyond crying. It does not know what thought is beyond crying with delight. It does not know what livelihood is, much less will it get its living in an evil way beyond sucking its mother. So you see, this is a very traditional example from the Pali text. Whenever the path of pradnya is talked in the Pali text, the issue of a baby is raised. The baby is by nature. If we try to apply the virtues of, all different virtues that are mentioned in the Buddha's teaching, the small child, they just practice it. They cannot but practice it. They do no evil in a way. So, can we say that the baby has that understanding of or knows the consequences of their behavior? The answer is no. The answer is a definite no. Therefore, the verse number 13 goes like this. The path of virtue must therefore be subject to test of pradnya, which is another name for understanding and intelligence. So pradnya is so important. So paramita, among the paramitas, the highest paramita or the paramita which always has to be there is the paramita of pradnya. And therefore, there is also another reason why Pradnya Paramita is so important and so necessary. There must be dana. Now see, listen very carefully. There must be dana, but without dana, dana may have a demoralizing effect. You see, we should also know where to do dana, isn't it? Otherwise, we will create a society which is demoralizing, isn't it? So, if we do dana where it is not needed and it is not accompanied by pradnya, then that dana has a demoralizing, effect. There must be karuna, we should be compassionate. But if we do compassion, blindly, practice compassion blindly, wherever it is not needed and is not accompanied by pradnya, that karuna may end up supporting evil. Isn't it? Every act of paramita must be tested by pradnya paramita, which is another name for wisdom. So you see, in Buddhism, the pradnya has a very highest sort of a regard, because without understanding, without knowing, if we practice something, it might lead to the negative consequences as well. The act might seem positive at the surface of it, but if it is not backed by the pradnya or understanding, then that act might be supporting evil as well. I premise that there must be knowledge and consciousness of what wrong conduct is, how it arises. Similarly, there must also be knowledge and consciousness of what is right conduct and wrong conduct. Without such knowledge, there cannot be real goodness, though the act may be good. That is why I say pradnya is necessary virtue. So pradnya, we cannot undermine the pradnya in Buddhism. It's a necessary virtue. If there is a wisdom, the other virtues are regulated. Otherwise, without the pradnya, we don't know what is wrong or right. So pradnya is kind of a judge, an educator, which tells us that this is right things to do, this is wrong thing to do. So I think that is the very important role of pradnya paramita in the whole scheme of Buddhism. And when Baba Ambedkar is talking about the path of virtue, the path of purity, the path of righteousness, and path of virtue, and while describing the path of virtue, he is giving so much importance to the pradnya. So you see, this everything ties together, that it's all logically explained, that we need the personal purity, we need to build up certain strength in our character, so that we begin to build the Ashtanga Marga, the path of righteousness in the society. So we need strength, and that strength comes from practice of the path of purity, and that will add certain strength to our character, and then it will lead to unfold the another path, and then ultimately the path of virtue, and the path ultimately is something which is lightened by the pradnya, the wisdom. So after discussing this path, the Buddha concluded his sermon by addressing the following admonition to the Parivrajaka. So he gives some admonition, and I think these are very common these days, that Buddhism is often looked at like this. So you are likely to call my Dhamma pessimistic because it calls the attention of mankind to the existence of suffering. I tell you, such a view of my Dhamma would be wrong. No doubt my Dhamma recognizes. See, now this word we have to underline, recognizes the existence, but forget not that it also lays equal trace on removal of suffering. My Dhamma has in it both hope and purpose. Its purpose is to remove avijja, by which I mean ignorance of existence of suffering. This is very traditional Pali text. The Sammaditthi is defined as the ignorance of the Four Noble Truth. So when we understand, penetrate the Four Noble Truth, we have the Sammaditthi. And this is very fundamental, this verse number 20, ignorance of the existence of suffering. Sometimes we ignore the suffering around us. Sometimes we even don't know that we are suffering. We don't know what is the form of the suffering. We don't know what are the roots of the suffering. What are the causes of the suffering. So what the Buddha teaches is to recognize the suffering. And I think that is very important, that it's the foundation of Buddhism to recognize suffering in all different forms. And this recognition of suffering is very important. But it's not enough to recognize suffering, but it's also the removal of the suffering. That's why I said we have to underline these two words, recognize the existence of suffering, and equal trace on the removal of suffering. Recognition is not enough, but without recognition, we cannot remove anything. So we have to recognize something in order to work on it. So we have to recognize what is the suffering. And unless we do that, we cannot remove that suffering. So in the verse number 19, the Buddha says, my Dhamma has in it both hope and purpose. So in Dhamma, there is a hope and there is a purpose. You see, there are a lot of questions about the meaning in life. Why should we live and all? So Buddha's Dhamma answers that question, that there is a hope for the humanity and there is a purpose for the humanity. And the purpose is to remove the suffering in the world. You know, how can a Dhamma that teaches that the purpose is to remove suffering in the world is pessimistic? It cannot be. So there is hope in it because it shows the way to put an end to human suffering. So it is not enough to remove the suffering in the world, but there has to be a way to remove the suffering in the world. And we have seen what are the ways to remove suffering in the world. And the Buddha then questions the Parivrajak, do you agree with this or not? And the Parivrajaka said, yes, we do. Okay, this brings us to the end of section number 6. But I thought that today we will finish this part 2 of this book 2. And this is remarkably important. You know, if we have to find out what is the most important, you know, the essence of the Buddha and Dhamma, we can always safely say that part 2 of book 2. You go and read part 2 of book 2 again and again. Okay, so let's finish it, the 7th one. It's a long one. We have taken a long time, but it was important for us to dwell so much time on it. The response of the Parivrajaka was, of course, you know, they saw that they realized that it's a new Dhamma. They were so struck by this new approach to the problem of life that they were unanimous in saying, never in the history of the world has any founder of religion taught that recognition of human suffering was the real basis of religion. Never in the history of the world has any founder of religion taught that removal of this misery is the real purpose of it. Recognition and removal. Never in the history of the world had a scheme of salvation been put forth so simple in its nature, so free from supernatural, natural and superhuman agency. You know, all the time it was thought that the evil in the world will be taken care by some god or by some supernatural, superhuman agency. But here the onus befalls on the human being to make this world a better place. So independent of even so antagonistic to the belief in a soul, to the belief in God, and to the belief in life after death. You know, all religions focus on these 3 things, you know, the belief in a soul, belief in God, and belief in life after death. You know, and without invoking these supernatural, superhuman agencies, we can talk about how the suffering in the world can be annihilated, can be ended. And I think that's the beauty of the Buddha's Dhamma. Never in the history of the world had a scheme of religion been put forth which had nothing to do with revelation. You know, Buddha's Dhamma is not revelation. You know, it was not revealed by somebody on some mountain. You know, it was Buddha discovered it on his own, you know, through his own efforts, by understanding the world around him, whose commands are born out of examination of social needs. See, this is very important. Examination of social needs. Ultimately, if you read about all religions, they talk about anything, but they come back to the society, how the society can be organized. And they have different schemes of organizing the society. Okay, so, you know, what Buddha discovered is how to fulfill the social needs of human beings. This is a very potent word, the social needs of man, which are not the orders of the God. So how do we develop a world which is not ordained by somebody higher whom nobody has seen, but how to create a world which satisfies the social needs of man? You see, never in the history of the world has salvation been conceived as the blessing of happiness to be attained by man in this life and on this earth by righteousness born out of his own efforts. You see, this is how beautiful this verse number 5. You know, the human beings can feel liberated. They can get liberation. They can feel the highest happiness here in this very life, on this very earth, by righteousness born out of his own efforts, to be free, to be happy. We cannot depend on anybody else. We have to make our own efforts. So the locus of development lies within us, on our shoulders. The responsibility to be free, responsibility to be happy, responsibility to be fearless, lies on our shoulder. And it comes by practicing these paths that the Buddha has taught us. These were the sentiments which the Parivrajaka's uttered after they had heard the Buddha's sermon on his new Dhamma. They felt that in him they found a reformer full of the most earnest moral purpose and trained in all the intellectual culture of his life, who had the originality and the courage to put forth deliberately and with a knowledge of opposing views the doctrine of a salvation to be found here in this life, in inward change of heart to be brought about by practice of self-culture and self-control. You see these two words, self-culture and self-control, So whatever there is in the world, good or bad, it's a human agency that makes it so. And the onus of being happy, the onus of being free, the onus of being, responsible lies upon our own shoulders. And, it all depends on, this, how we cultivate ourselves and how we control ourselves. And I think this is now like sort of a crescendo of all the way Buddha has taught his first teachings. Their reverence for him became so unbounded that they at once surrendered to him and requested him to accept them as his disciples. This happens all the time in the Buddha's teaching. Whenever Buddha teaches, expounds, he clears a ground for the people, he clears confusion for the people, and it happens that people feel so unbounded reverence to the Buddha. This is very important. This word, see, I think, these paths and all this discussion is very beautifully laid out by Baba Sahib Ambedkar, isn't it? But you see the verse number 8 shows the kind of the emotion that Baba Sahib felt for the Buddha, that we all need to feel for the Buddha. Their reverence for him became so unbounded. He's not saying unbounded reverence. He's saying that whatever reverence there was, it becomes limitless, unbounded, that they at once surrendered to him. They took refuge. They said, Buddha, you are right. We surrendered to you, and requested him to accept them as his disciples. Okay. So when we feel that unbound, reverence for something, we cannot but surrender. When we see something higher, in a sense of a human life, we cannot, but we cannot even hold ourselves. We cannot but surrender to that thing, because that reverence becomes so unbounded. The Buddha admitted them into his order by uttering the formula Ehi Bhikkhave, come in bhikshus. They were known as Panchavargiya bhikshus. In all the Buddha's teachings, if we see the word Ehi Bhikkhave, it's very, very interesting word. He is inviting people to come and join. It's an invitation to join. And I think this invitation is very interesting. Today, when we are living in a world where, we have to welcome a lot of people in the Buddha's fold. And it's our duty to open the doors for many people to join, to understand, to feel awe of this great, great human being that the humanity has never seen, the Buddha himself. So I think, the reverence for the Buddha is very important, in a sense that then only we surrender ourselves to become his disciple. We just don't blindly follow him, but, and Buddha will never encourage that, because prior to that, there was a discussion on Prajna Paramita, the wisdom itself, the intelligence itself, and responsibility is not on the Buddha. It befalls on everybody. Buddha did whatever he could. Baba Sahib Ambedkar did whatever he could. We have to do whatever we could do to relieve the suffering in the world. But this invitation, Ehi Bhikkhave, and the Buddha, when upon a request by the 5 Parivrajaka to accept them as a disciple, he just said, come and join, Ehi Bhikkhave. So this word Ehi is very important from many point of views. because nothing is going to happen on its own unless the Buddha makes efforts to reach out to the world and teach and interact with the world, and then only people will join. So I think that is the purpose of the Buddha's Dhamma, to make more and more people to join this path of righteousness, to join this path of purity, to join this path of virtue. And therefore that makes a Buddhism a kind of invitation for the humanity to join. And in a sense, whatever much abuse the word is missionary. I think the first missionary religion in the world was Buddhism itself, because the Buddha's disciple went everywhere to teach people his doctrine and his teachings. And that's what Baba Sahib Ambedkar said, that to preach and propagate Buddhism is the real service to humanity, because you give ultimate sort of a path to the human beings so that they can be free, they can be happy, and they can become the source of goodness in the world. And that's why we have to think about this invitation, a Bhikkhave, to all the people. I think the word Bhikkhave means become a partner in this great movement. It's like sharer in this great movement that the Buddha started. And in a way, when we share this aspiration, when we share this sort of the vision of the Buddha, the path of the Buddha, we may in a way join the Buddha's movement. Buddha says, come and join. Hey, Bhikkhave. Okay, let's do it together. So I think with this, we have concluded a very important part of the Buddha and his Dhamma, the part 2 of the book 2 of the Buddha and his Dhamma. And I think that's very significant. And it has to be read again and again, studied again and again. And we have tried to give some attention to it. And I think we have to, share this part 2 of the book 2 with a lot of people. I would encourage you people to develop your own understanding about it, to share with others in whatever language you can. And with this, we will end our class today, the talk part of it, and we will open up for discussion for next 15 minutes or so.
Thank you very much.
Alka bhai.
Yeah. In this part, Prajna has been given utmost importance. So one must know that regarding Panchashil, purity of the person, that unless he does personal purity, he cannot do good for himself, neither for his family and society.
Right.
Yeah. For example, if a person is drunkard, then he cannot use his prajna.
Right.
If a person out of anger, extreme hate, if he has committed a crime, then how can we expect him to do good in the society or for him or family?
Mm-hmm.
So, Shil means prajna stands first, and then Shil means personal purity stands second before following this eightfold path. Prajna, Shil, and then Samadhi.
Good. Very interesting, Alka madam.
Thank you.
I think this a lot of things will be further clarified when we move on, and because we are just in the book 2, and even this part needs to be this book 2 will go on for some time, because we are going to look at how Buddha taught to different people. But this part 2 is like a essence of Buddhism, essence of Buddha and his Dhamma. Okay, once we understand this part, then the other things become easy. And it's not easy, it's very dense. As I said, that you can take one sentence and you can start elaborating it, unpacking it, further, bringing it in the light of the Pali text, and you begin to see a very different sort of a dimension to it. Like, this is what I understood, all the time I have been studying Buddha and his Dhamma, and when I read more about other Buddhist texts and come back to the Buddha and his Dhamma, I see a very different light rising out of it. which makes sense in this world, and in the context of the society, and in the present time itself. Harsh?
Yes, Mangesh bhai. So yeah, the sessions are always good from you. And like going back in my memories, I remember reading Buddha and Dhamma when I was in high school. So at that time, it was very difficult to grasp a lot of things, except for some stories or something. But catching up all those simple words and their meaning and how it applies to our life was very difficult at that time. But now I am understanding a lot of things and where the problem we have in our society. So very interesting to learn, and I think this is just beginning of the book. So I hope that by the time we go till the end, there will be a lot of good things I will be able to learn in the process.
Yes.
So very good, explanation from your side also. So keep it up. Thank you.
This is not an easy book. This is
Yes.
very difficult book.
Yeah.
And Babasaheb Ambedkar saw the difficulties for people to understand it. Particularly, then he said that it should be translated in Marathi. And this translation, of course, came very soon. So I think you are right. This book is not easy. And that's why this sort of studies and our personal reflections can help us a lot. And then you see, within this part too, even if we grasp it, there is so much to offer to the community.
Yes.
In this part 2 itself, isn't it? So now how we all become the interlocutor of this wisdom of Babasaheb Ambedkar to the world, I think that is also a question, isn't it? In a way, how we get ourselves invited to the Buddha's world, So I think this is a part of the movement, in a sense of I always see these classes as a part of the movement of an invitation for all of us, to come and understand, learn the Buddha's teachings and share with others. So you are right, brother. It's not easy, but we can, if we go on, with making our efforts. I think.
Yes, my dad has purchased all the 3 versions of the book.
Very good.
Times in English and Marathi.
Very good.
So I went through. I don't remember at what time in that age I went through.
Right.
But now I am like reinventing all those things again. So it's very interesting to know that these are some like very basic things which we ignore, or maybe parents don't try to teach us also sometimes. In what you call भागदौड़ की जिंदगी में कुछ नहीं कर पाते, भूल जाते हैं.
Yes.
So like that. So it's good.
It's true. It's true, Harsh bhai.
Yeah.
Anybody?
Yes, Mangesh sir.
Yes, Deepak bhai.
Mangesh sir, I have a question arising from the previous session. And the question, while I was reading the text, is the Babasaheb compares between Samadhi and Samma Samadhi. And he says that Mera Samadhi is a negative. And what we need is Samma Samadhi.
Right.
So what comes in my mind is traditionally, even he talks about the concentration and dhyanas there, and the attainment of the dhyanic states is seen as a weighty positive karmas traditionally. So how do we see that as compared to what Babasaheb said? Yeah.
See, I think in the beginning of the Buddha and Dhamma, there is a very fundamental discussion on Samadhi Marga. And I think Babasaheb Ambedkar have this discussion in the beginning of the Buddha and Dhamma as to how Buddha went to this Alara Kalama, and he mastered a certain level of Samadhi. And when he also went to Uddaka Ramahutta, and he managed to master what is traditionally in the Buddhist the Samadhi literature known as Neva Sanna Na Sannayatan, that sphere of Arupa Dhyana. So Buddha indeed mastered that, and having mastered all those things, as Babasaheb Ambedkar says, that he he left that path. So what we can begin to see is that the samadhi can be positive in a sense of cultivating good mental states, attending to this various dhyanic stage can be good. But if it doesn't lead to a permanent shift in our thoughts, in our behavior, which will be inspired by doing goodness in the world. And I think this is very interestingly underlined by Baba Saheb Ambedkar when he talks about Samma Samadhi, because we know that the practice of Samadhi is a very natural practice for human beings, and in all different cultures, not only in India but also elsewhere, people have been practicing different modes of concentration, different modes of attending to what is called the Arupa Dhyana, and there are certain drugs which can induce such kind of states. We know that for sure now. And so mere suspending this kind of mental states without giving them a positive push, or without cultivating the mind that is good, in a sense of being good in the world, doing good for the world. I think that is what is meant by Samadhi in the scheme of Baba Saheb Ambedkar. And there are a lot of people who had left, before the Buddha, there was a tradition called Samana tradition, and a lot of people went to the forest and went to seek whatever spiritual solace they wanted to get. So I think we have to understand this from that point of view of attaining dhyanic states. And it's good, it can be good, but if it doesn't do good to oneself and others, or it makes you get lost into those fanciful mental states, without bringing any radical change within us, and without pointing out radical change in the society, I think we have to be on our guards. We have seen this in not only in Buddhism but other traditions also. People get so much locked into this kind of what is called these spiritual bubbles, and there is a Tibetan teacher who calls this kind of an attitude, very interestingly, spiritual materialism. He says that we have to find a ways to throw ourselves in the society to be able to serviceable to the humanity, and vis-a-vis completely devoting to attaining something, some kind of the stages in the dhyanas. So I think I think we don't discard that, we don't judge it, we just say that for us Samma Samadhi is something that offers a training in the permanent shift in our disposition, that props us or help us to do good in the world. The goodness becomes so natural for us if we practice kind of samadhi that Baba Saheb Ambedkar is referring here as a Samma Samadhi. But of course, this is a bigger question. You can also throw more light on this. Alka Madam can throw some light on it. You can all free to talk about it.
Yeah. In Samma Samadhi, it is a temporary state in which 5 vikar of mind like greed, hatred, laziness, doubt, and indecision are drawn away for a while. But like when people do prayers, chanting, etc., then naturally, or singing a song, then naturally these 5 evils are drawn away. But when after some time, when you come out of that state, then your mind is again in these 5 vikas. But this is samadhi, means it is a temporary state when there is concentration of mind for a while, for gaining some attaining some aim. Or but in Samyak Samadhi, it gives permanent training to the mind to think of positive, and it gives inspiration to the mind to do the good, and thus it gives permanent training to the mind to do the Kushan Kamma. This is Samma Samadhi. So this is Anapanasati and mostly mind concentration. And mind has tendency that once the negative thinking, the thoughts are removed from the mind, they are immediately replaced by positive thoughts.
Good. Deepak, yourself can throw some light on it. What's your understanding about this?
Yes, sir. I think traditionally speaking, I'm just putting forth the views that are traditionally subscribed, let's say. So it is said that whatever that Siddhartha Gautama learned from Allah Kalama and Uddhav Karamputra, especially the practice of, say, Anapanasati, he used that during the night of enlightenment. He kept going on and on and on from one state of dhyana to the other, and from all the way up, then coming down to the first dhyana. And because then you have this factor of vichara and vitarka, where subtle mental activities, and then putting forth those questions that and trying to understand the nature of existence. In Baba Sahib's words, he started thinking about those questions that he was for which he left home, and why there is suffering in the society, yes, and how can it be resolved. So traditionally speaking, again, there's an emphasis on samatha practice. So these dhyanic states, rupa dhyana and arupa dhyanas, they come under that. And one simile that comes to my mind is that until you still make your mind still like a pond, till then you wouldn't be able to see the reflection of the moon in the night. Similarly, if your mind is not calm and at ease and has the training in stability and samatha, then it's possible for you to engage in other meditative so-called vipassana practices, which brings about fundamental transformation in the mind of how we look our attitudes. And I think again, I say that that's something that I wanted to say. And there are several forms of karmas that is being traditionally said that, and positive karmas. And one of the positive karmas, heavy body karma, is the experience of the dhyanic states. And so, and there are wholesome, skillful states. Yes.
Good.
And so I think maybe what I understand Baba Sahib is trying to say is that suspension of those hindrances are not enough. What we need is a fundamental transformation.
Good.
And I think that's the point he's trying to make. Whereas that's how I would like to interpret. I wouldn't like to interpret as that those dhyanic states are not useful, because throughout the Buddhist tradition, meditation has been yes, a fundamental practice, has always had the place in Buddhist tradition. And those dhyanic states are important, but simply knowing that if we do not bring about a fundamental change, they in themselves can become a trap. Yes. Yeah.
Good, very good, very good. If not, then I think we have come to the end of our class today. If there is nobody. Samiksha madam, you want to say something?
Yeah, actually, Jai Bhim, sir.
Jai Bhim, madam.
Our past lessons, I was reflecting on whatever we have discussed on path of personal purity, path of righteousness, and path of virtue. So today also, as we discussed that how personal purity is so important, and we have to build our personal purity and practice that. So I was not getting answer to this question which came to my mind. Like if we see the first percept, like refrain from killing beings. Okay. So there we also see need to kill and will to kill. So for example, for my taste buds, if I am, killing, then it is wrong. But if there is need, like if any animal is attacking and if I am killing, that is right. So in this case, like who is correct? Because animal is hungry and he wants to satisfy his hunger. So who is right in this case, and how to, and I am killing that animal for my desire, like to save my life. So how to practice this this point in and build this personal purity in daily life, and how to practice this was my question, sir, which I was not getting answer.
Very difficult question, Samiksha ji. This question often comes about, the need to kill or will to kill. This is very important question, and I think that's why we have to understand the role of Pradnya, because Baba Ambedkar and even the Buddha himself put the Pradnya in the forefront. So, sometimes something depends on the context. And for example, there is often an example of a person who is about to push a button of a nuclear bomb, and you have a choice to, you have a gun that you can shoot that man. So what would you do? Would you refrain yourself from not killing that man who is trying to destroy the world by pushing the button? What will be your answer to that, Samiksha madam?
Will definitely,
Yes.
Yeah.
You might not kill him, but might shoot his leg or whatever, I think, or his hands or whatever. So, see this whole thing of these moral dilemmas and moral questions, they will be always appearing and arising in our lives all the time. What to do, what is right or wrong. And therefore, I think the pradnya is very important. The intelligence or buddhi is very important in all the situations. Otherwise, we will end up becoming, we might end up causing more harm to the world than the good. I was just watching one documentary. I don't remember its name now, but there was a lot of rodents in that forest, and then foxes were introduced, and that foxes controlled the population of the rodents, and then because of that, the forest started growing up and the biodiversity started emerging and like that. So there is, I think, the natural ecosystem also is there, in the world. So you cannot have excess of anything else. And I think there are stories like this, that the Buddha has seen exploitation in the world when he was plowing the field of his forest, of his father, where he saw that the insects are being killed when the plow is going through the soil, and when the insects are killed, some snakes are thriving on it. The snake is killed by a bird, and the bird is killed by other species, like that. So he saw all this chain of violence and suffering in the nature itself. That's some of the text says. So yes, you're right. There are a lot of moral dilemmas we all have, and we have to find out the solution to them through the intelligence, through the buddhi. If you are interested, there is one book written by Michael Snelden. I think the book is Justice, where he talks about all these moral dilemmas and talks about how intelligence can be used. I might share a link of that, in the group.
Also, in this part, we have to practice parmitas, 10 parmitas. Danshil, Upeksha, Neshkama, Virya, Shanti, Satya, Adhishthana, and Karuna and Maitri. And of course, along with that, Pradnya should be there in each parmita. Right. Karuna and Maitri. Should be, if we want to have Karuna, and then while giving dan to drunkard, then we must use our Pradnya. Yes. So with each parmita, we have to use Pradnya. So this part teaches us Arya Ashtangik Marga, means path of purity, then 8-fold path, and then 10 parmitas. Good. So answer is simple.
All right, then we will end our class today, and maybe meet next time. Okay.